It's time for the sermon. All right. Make sure I'm at the right place in my agenda. So it's been alluded to a couple times, and many of you know, but I don't want to assume everyone does, especially any visitors or newer folks we have. I've been on leave from the congregation for the last 2 months because we worked out an unusual schedule, because I have another job I do in addition to my 3/4 time work here for the congregation. Indeed, I work roughly full-time most of the year for the church, and then I take 2 months completely off, or nearly completely off. I checked in a couple times. So in my other life, I am a tax return preparer. And yes, that is just as glamorous as it sounds. More so, maybe. Our finance chair, who I don't see here today because I assume he's still recovering from his tax season, is Adam Kegley. We checked in a couple times just to, commiserate, ask a question or two. Anyway, so today I feel a little like I'm doing one of those assignments you might remember from school, but instead of what I did on my summer vacation, this is a little bit of what I did on my tax season leave. However, I will not go deep into marginal rates or depreciation tables or non-refundable credits. I freely admit that a lot of the minutia of our tax season is not only tedious and boring, but frequently makes no sense whatsoever. I still have to follow it, but that doesn't mean that it actually is logical or reasonable. I've been astounded working now for almost a decade in taxes. How often the answer to a difficult tax question is, it depends. Which is not a reassuring answer, I'm aware. But it depends on how much we're talking about, or on your particular status as a person, which is a little dicey there, right? Or how you use that money you're asking me about, or 100 other factors. Again, many of which may not actually make a whole lot of sense, and yet there we are with our tax code. In short, what I did on my tax season leave was a whole lot of returns for individuals and couples. I don't do corporate taxes. I leave that to people who do that sort of thing. So I do a lot of calculations to determine what someone owes in income and Social Security and Medicare taxes. And then, we see if what they paid in those taxes during the year was enough or too much or not quite enough. Sometimes not nearly enough, unfortunately. And I fill out returns, which is a whole bunch of pages. You've seen these things. And we review, we go back and forth, we fix any issues. We either had a little miscommunication or there was something they didn't tell me the first time around, those sort of things. And then we e-file. I e-file those returns. So I do a fair amount of math, which is the part that many people sometimes tell me they find very overwhelming. I don't particularly find it overwhelming. I was good at least at that kind of math. Once I got to calculus, I didn't understand anything, but I don't have to do any calculus in taxes, fortunately. The truth, though, is that most of my job during that season is about communication. It's working with people to understand their lives, how they make money, and how to help ensure that I'm really understanding what they're saying, that they're really understanding their situation, and occasionally giving advice about how they could do better, either on this return or on future returns. So the pastoral care skills that I learned in seminary and have practiced and honed in my ministerial career actually get a huge amount of use. More so than most people might imagine. So today, very few numbers. In fact, I'm not sure there's really another number in my sermon today. You don't need to worry about any math problems, I promise. And I'll try to avoid the more boring kinds of tax talk. But I do want to talk about how taxes are, in my opinion, and I'm not the only one with this opinion, taxes are the very foundation of civilization. The story I told today was a little bit about that taxes are a way to try to make sure that we all contribute to our shared life. To quote my friend, the Reverend Brian Ferguson, he said, "A friend of mine once said, I like paying my taxes because I feel I'm contributing to a civilized society. Brian continued, I don't think he represents a typical view, but I really like the idea. Can you imagine if every time we bought something, we felt we were contributing to a better world? And so ends that quote. So I'll get back there in a second, but first let's back up. The first system of taxation that we know about started in Egypt about 5,000 years ago. It probably predates the earliest of the pyramids. Only barely, though, which I think those two things are related. I don't think you build a pyramid without doing some taxing. To go forward a few thousand years, the Rosetta Stone, the famous artifact which helps scholars learn to read hieroglyphics, do you know what the text is about? It's about taxes, exactly, yeah. It's kind of obvious given the sermon today, but it was a tax decree made by a new ruler. In fact, he was announcing that he was rolling back some taxes, reducing them, which, if that sounds really familiar to our political system today, I don't think it's a coincidence. The Rosetta Stone was a tax reform law that was being publicized. That's what that is. To jump forward another couple thousand years, you might recall, too, that the United States split from Great Britain over, among other things, disagreements about taxation and about who gets to decide those tax questions. There's the biblical witness. You might recall that the Gospels start with a tax event. Joseph takes his family to the town where his ancestors are from in order to participate in a tax census. Now, this is probably not a real thing. It didn't probably actually happen, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense why he would need to go back instead of wherever he lives now. But anyway, from Luke 2, and I quote, "And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And Joseph also went up from Galilee into the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child." So, taxes, you just can't get away from them, right? It seems, in fact, and I'm always wary of making absolutes, but I'm going to say it anyway, that every civilization of any size that we know about throughout human history has had some system of taxation. It might have been labor you had to contribute, or part of your crops, or money, as we're more familiar with, or some other means of payment, military service, for instance. But every civilization seems to have had this. In fact, as near as we can tell, taxation is as old as civilization. As long as people have lived in large groups, they have found ways to collectively pay for projects that benefit the entire community. My contention today, then, is that at their heart, taxes are a collective commitment from us to the very concept of community and civilization. And I say, how could you not want to participate in that? But back to reality. Of course, it's in the details that these things get complicated. It's easy for most people, nearly all people, in fact, to support the general idea of taxes, especially as I just expressed it. Payments for things that we need that jointly benefit from, and we should thus jointly pay for. It is a rare, and I will say misguided, person who really says that all taxes are wrong or a mistake. And I'm not going to bother with that particular debate today. But in the details, things get interesting. Who pays and how much? That's one of the questions that generates real debate over and over and over again. Should all of us pay a similar proportion? Should rich pay more? Should we tax different kinds of income or wealth differently? These are all lively, current debates in our own tax system. And I'll just say that I have a lot of issues with our current tax system. I participate in it both as a taxpayer and a tax preparer. And I disagree with a lot of things in it. On the day I'm miraculously put in charge of all taxation, things are going to change. For instance, no one who doesn't make at least a living wage will pay any income tax on that day. Capital gains will be taxed at the same rates or maybe more than earned income. I think one of the most ridiculous things about our system. The cap on Social Security taxes, that is the income above which you stop paying those taxes, should be lifted or eliminated. The dependent care tax credit is one of my favorite bugaboos. It should be dramatically increased to better reflect the actual cost of childcare. So those are a few ideas. And if any of those made no sense to you all, that's okay, because you are not alone, I promise. A lot of the reason that tax reform never happens is not just that some people want it that way, but also that the ideas get so technical that everyone's eyes glaze over and they want to stop talking about it. Indeed, our current system of taxation is so complicated, many of us throw up our hands at the very thought of it. And we hope that the withholding tables or the computer programs or tax experts will make sure that we're doing the right thing, lest the IRS authorities come for us in the middle of the night. Which, by the way, unless you're committing absolutely massive tax fraud, that's not what happens. They send you a letter or a phone call. My colleague, the Reverend Victoria Safford, noted this trend, not just when it comes to taxes, but so many things in our society. She said, most of us have only a faint understanding of how societies open up or close down, become supportive of freedom or ruled by fear. One reason for our vagueness about how liberty lives or dies is that we have tended lately to subcontract out the tasks of the patriot, to let the professionals, lawyers, scholars, activists, politicians, worry about understanding the Constitution or protecting our rights, the way we hire a professional to do our taxes. They can keep democracy up and running. We're busy. What kind of relationship do we want our children to have with liberty? What kind of relationship do we intend to have with it ourselves? So ends her reading. I think this way about the taxes. I'm very happy to have a business helping people, but I also consider it a core part of what I do to help people understand their own taxes. Not always so much that they want to go do them themselves. I would like them to keep being my clients, but I think it's important to understand something so fundamental to our daily lives. Now, our tax system is complex, in part because our lives and our world are complex. But of course, as I alluded to earlier, the other reason, the more complicated and opaque something is, the easier it is for powerful people to exploit it. Our tax system is nowhere near fair or perfect. I don't pretend that it is. In fact, working in the tax field has given me a deeper and often more cynical view on this than I had before, and I didn't start out being very positive about taxes either. And maybe that's a good transition to another problem with taxes. There's the other side of the tax debate. What about all the things that my taxes go to that I disagree with? The bombs dropped on people half a world away, or the ill-conceived public works boondoggles, or a favorite one in some circles, the art that doesn't seem like art to me at all. Or you can fill in the blank here, whatever our government does that you don't like, and there are plenty of things to put in that blank. Now, there are radical activists on both ends of the spectrum, shall we say. Some of them refuse to pay taxes on the grounds that they won't support weapons of war, for instance. Now, the principled ones, and I know a few of these folks, the principled ones among them still contribute an equal amount, but to good works instead of to the government. In other words, they're not trying to get out of their fair share, at least in their way of thinking. I'm not sure I agree with it. There are, of course, people who just don't want to pay any taxes, not for principled reasons particularly. How do we square all of this? We vote and we advocate. And yet our tax money, whether it is very modest or immense amounts, goes to things that we despise. Now, as I said, there are other taxpayers who feel the same way, but about the very things I most support. Public education comes to mind, for instance. There is a concerted effort to undermine and destroy our system of public education, which is something I'm 100% in favor of, public education for all people. In fact, as we move towards our annual meeting at UU Society of Mill Creek, it's just a few weeks off now, it's worth a reminder that the same thing happens here. Any individual among us might not be a huge fan of every part of our congregational budget. We might not love that our pledge and our contributions go towards something perhaps that we don't personally use, but still we come together, whether it's in our congregation or in our country, at our best, at least, to make decisions that help all of us. We hope that we can get ever closer to a world where we use our resources to the very best to support the flourishing of all humanity. So to sum up my sermon, I'm defending taxes today. Easy to complain about, especially our specific system. So go ahead, complain about our specific system. But as you're thinking about all that money taken from your paycheck or paid last week to settle up what you owe with the IRS, I encourage you to take a moment to think of all the good things you're supporting with it. Taxation equals civilization, and may it be so forever. Amen.